The Painted Cave Fire and the Floods of March 1991, a presentation of the Santa Barbara County Flood Control District. June 27, 1990, strong downhill winds pushed the Painted Cave Fire from the foothills into the residential areas of Santa Barbara. The fire leaves behind a path of almost total destruction, covering an area of nearly 5,000 acres. After the flames are extinguished, the sigh of relief is short-lived. The Santa Barbara County Flood Control District warns that the denuded watershed of Maria Ignacia Creek poses a severe danger of flooding and debris flows. The Flood Control District's warning is based on the fact that the lack of ground cover and hydrophobic soils will cause high runoff, and that this high runoff will carry with it ashes, unprotected soil, and debris left by the fire. Of particular concern are debris flows, such as the one shown in this footage taken in Los Angeles by the U.S. Geological Survey. Debris flows are not new to the south coast of Santa Barbara County. The most recent debris flows occurred after the Romero Fire in 1971 and after the Coyote Fire in 1964. Based on historical evidence and research by others, the Flood Control District determines that a storm with sustained intensities exceeding 1 inch per hour on a previously wetted watershed would cause massive debris movement. With emergency funding and assistance provided by the Soil Conservation Service, the Flood Control District prepares an emergency watershed protection plan. The plan calls for clearing creeks of obstructive vegetation, erosion control measures, emergency levees, and as the main element, 2 debris basins on Maria Ignacia Creek. The plan provides flood protection to over 250 homes and 2 schools. Altogether, construction works exceeding $5 million in cost are planned. A fast-track schedule is set up to have the features of the plan in place before the storm season. Conceptual design work and efforts by the Public Works Department to acquire land for the debris basins literally start while the fire is still burning.
There are going to be substantial impacts, and unfortunately the mitigation measures which are mentioned here, while they...
Strong resistance from some local environmental groups and state and federal regulatory agencies forces the Flood Control District to present and defend the planned elements item by item in public at weekly Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors meetings. After unanimous approval of the plan by the board, permits have to be secured from the Army Corps of Engineers and the California Department of Fish and Game. The regular permit application process is too time-consuming to be completed before the winter storm season. With both agencies resisting issuing the required permits on an emergency basis, the entire plan is in jeopardy. Only after a write-in campaign by residents and through the efforts of Senator Hart and Representative Lago Marcino does the Flood Control District receive the required permits. The emergency permit issued by the Army Corps of Engineers specifically excludes Atascadero Creek, despite the district's warning that there is a 30% chance of bank overflow and flooding with the coming storm season. Atascadero Creek collects nearly all of the drainage from the burned watersheds. For the debris basins, creek clearing, and emergency levees, however, the path is free. Flood Control District personnel designed and supervised construction of the debris basins, which means excavating and moving 78,000 cubic yards of soil and rock. Burke Construction Company performs the work on a very tight schedule by orchestrating the movements of up to 2 scrapers, 2 excavators, 4 dozers, and 10 trucks in confined space. The debris basins are designed to collect sediment, rock, and boulders, yet allow the storm runoff to be passed downstream. 16 miles of creek are cleared of burned vegetation and snags by flood control personnel with assistance of the California Youth Authority teams. Close to 1/3 of a mile of emergency levees are provided for a critical section of Maria Ignacia Creek. Sandbags and concrete center dividers, commonly seen on highways, are placed in a narrow right-of-way between the creek bank and private backyards. All features of the Emergency Watershed Protection Plan are completed and in place by the first week of November, ready to take on the first storms of the season. A party is held with the residents, the contractor, the county and Soil Conservation Service personnel to celebrate the successful completion of the project. What would have taken 2 to 4 years under normal circumstances was completed in 104 calendar days. While the flood control district's preparations are right on schedule, the winter rains are not. Rather than beginning the storm season in November, nature gives Santa Barbara a continuing drought with no significant rainfall until March of 1991. However, as if to make up for the late start, March comes in like the proverbial lion. The storm of February 28th and March 1st brings 5 to 8 inches of rainfall to the burned watersheds. Intensities do not exceed a half an inch per hour. As predicted, the intensities are not sufficient to cause the massive debris flows which could have filled the debris basins instantly. As the skies clear, the amount of sediment in the basins constitutes 5 to 10% of their capacity, or about 10,000 tons. Not all of the debris from the burned watershed is trapped in the basins. Floating debris and fine material in suspension is carried through the basins. This material, along with material from smaller watersheds not provided with debris basins, is carried downstream with the flow until it reaches Atascadero Creek. Atascadero Creek is choked bank to bank with vegetation. Despite several years of studies and negotiations, the Flood Control District had not been able to obtain all permits to clear vegetation out of the creek. Now, the flow of water in the creek is slowed due to the obstructive vegetation. Floating debris from the burned watershed is trapped, and suspended settlement settles out between the vegetation. As a result, Atascadero Creek comes to within 1 foot of overtopping its banks, endangering over 100 adjacent residential properties. After the storm, the Flood Control District notifies the Corps of Engineers and urges a reconsideration of the emergency status of Atascadero Creek. With a major storm forecast for March 17th and 18th and considerable deposits of sediment and debris in the creek from the last storm, the danger of water going over the banks and into the residential area is very high. The Flood Control District immediately starts construction of a sandbag wall to protect the residences close to the creek. On March 14th, 5 Corps officials come to Santa Barbara on a fact-finding mission. As a result, an emergency permit is issued on March 15th. The permit, however, is insufficient in that it only allows clearing of a small portion of the overgrown section of the creek 1 mile below the area where the flood threat is the highest. A last-ditch effort by County Supervisor Tom Rogers, U.S. Senator John Seymour, and Congressman Bob Lagomasino makes it possible to get the Corps and the Department of Fish and Game to issue emergency permits on March 17th that allow the flood control crews to clear Atascadero Creek. With rain imminent and the permits signed, flood control crews go to work. Within 5 hours of permit signing, the rain starts, daylight fades, and the water in the creek rises several feet, making working conditions dangerous and equipment operation nearly impossible. However, in those 5 hours, the Flood Control District cleared 3,500 feet of obstructed vegetation, floating debris, and accumulated sediment. The storm of March 17th and 18th brings between 7 and 10 inches of rain to the burned watersheds. Atascadero Creek carries water bank to bank and overtops its banks in the area where creek clearing was stopped. Fortunately, the overtopping is confined within an open space, causing no damage. The burned watershed is so saturated from the previous storm that changes in rainfall intensity have a sudden and sometimes dramatic impact on creek water levels downstream. The storm leaves the debris basins filled to about 20 to 30% capacity, or double the amount from the previous storm. The smaller of the debris basins has water going over its spillway for the first time. A quick-moving storm passes through Santa Barbara County on March 20th, dropping 1.5 inches of rain on the burned watersheds. Although the volume of rain is small, nearly 1 inch of rain falls within 1 hour, causing the district concern, as 1 inch per hour is the intensity threshold beyond which there is a possibility for debris flows. A small debris flow may actually have occurred since a large amount of debris is collected. Although most of the debris collected is sediment, for the first time, trees and rocks up to 2 feet in diameter are transported to the smaller basin. After the rain of March 20th, the basins are filled 30 to 35% of capacity. The last storm of March occurs on the 24th, 25th, and 26th with 2 to 4 inches of rain over the burned watersheds, with the emergency clearing of Atascadero Creek nearly complete and no rainfall intensities coming that would be too high, in fact quite low. No problems are encountered. The debris basins are left about 1/3 full of sediment, rocks, and burned vegetation. March, which came in like a lion, goes out like a lamb. Looking back, the Flood Control District finds that without the debris basins and creek clearing, over 40,000 tons of sediment and debris would have been deposited in the creeks and would, most likely, have caused local flooding. 40,000 tons, or 8,000 truckloads, could fill a football field to a depth of nearly 20 feet. Had Atascadero Creek not been cleared, several houses would have been flooded on March 17th and 18th. The burned watersheds, thanks to the rains of March, are on the way to recovery. Full recovery, however, will take several years.
The Painted Cave fire and the floods of March 1991 demonstrate the need for a preventive flood protection program. The Santa Barbara County Flood Control District shares the environmental values of our community and as such has integrated environmental protection within our preventive program. Unfortunately, programs like ours are jeopardized by a very time-consuming, very costly environmental permit process. As director for Santa Barbara County Flood Control District, I hope that the experiences since the Painted Cave fire will bring about some changes with the regulatory agency procedures so that lives, properties, and the environment can be protected from devastating floods.